I'm Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic.
And my name is Howard Eber, and I too am a recovered alcoholic and addict.
Welcome to a Way Out book study. So last week we said we were going to start how it works, but we actually went into a whole background and history of it, which I thought was perfect. It set the tone for what we're going to cover tonight. Um, I said this before. This is where for us, Howard and I, this is where it really starts to get fun because we get directions to give out, and this is where it gets fun, because it turns into almost like a hands-on workshop, because we're going to take and we like to take our time, as you know, but this is a lot in this chapter. There's we're not even at step three, we're kind of at the bridge of it all. And but this chapter, of course, contains 3 and 4, and which means in about a year or so. No, I'm just kidding. No, in about a few weeks, we'll hopefully get to step 4, and that's where it really gets fun too. And I always say this when we're in chapters like this, if we got one person's ears open a little bit more, we've done our job. Um, and so we are on page 58. And I mentioned this last week. I've been to a lot of meetings over the years, way more than, I mean, probably 5,000 meetings, because I started when I was 20 years old, but never got more than 3 months. But, now 25 years into it, getting clean in 2000, I've been to a lot of meetings, still go to meetings. And that's a lot how it works. And sometimes we sit there and kind of let it drift by us. And sometimes we sit there and smile because we hear the words, but some people don't ever hear the words. And so we like to take our time with this. Um, so we're on page 58, and we're going to jump right into this. Um, so here we start off. Never have we seen a person fail who thoroughly followed our path. Is
Excuse
that
me.
is that true, that that's what Bill wanted to say? Never.
I think the book says rarely at
Yeah.
this point. Um, and Mike, Steve, and I had decided we're going to have some fun with this because inevitably, at almost any meeting where they read this page, there'll be some, I don't want to use a pejorative, so just say some member of the group that will say, when Bill was asked if he would change anything in the book, he always said that in how it works, he wished he would have said, instead of rarely have we seen a person fail, he wished he would have written never have we seen a person fail. That's not true. Absolutely apocryphal. I'm going to put this up here so you can take a look at it with me. If you go to the AA World Services site, there's a frequently asked questions section. And one of the top two questions is rarely versus never. A common misconception is that originally the word never, or that Bill wished he had changed it to never. Both untrue. In the book that started it all, as illustrated in the book that started it all, in Not God, History of Alcoholics Anonymous by Ernie Kurtz, Bill is quoted as saying, "My recollection is we did give this a considerable thought at the time of writing. I think the main reason for the use of the word rarely was to avoid anything that would look like a claim of 100% result. And pass it on, Bill said, according to the apocryphal story, it's quoted that Bill was asked in later years whether there was any change he wished to make in the book, and he replied that he would change rarely to never. Bill himself said he never considered that change. So if you hear that at a meeting, you now know that that was never considered. And to give you some more background into what Bill had to say about it, he said, uh, people have apparently tried their best and failed, not because of unwillingness, but perhaps a reason of physical tension or some undisclosed quirk not known to them or anyone else. Neither did we want to over encourage relatives and friends in the supposition that their dear ones would absolutely surely get well if AA only, if they were only willing to go with AA. Anyhow, and I think this is a kick, Bill knows what he's talking about. He says, anyhow, I do know this. The text of the AA book is so frozen in the minds of thousands of AAers that even the slightest change would create an uproar. Thank you.
All right, so let's see what the book says now. Rarely, I'm sorry, I had written the wrong part. Rarely have we seen a person fail who steadily followed our path. So, I mean, there's some very important sentences here because it's a promise. And, it's, the word, you know, thoroughly is a word we see a lot in this page. And the nice promise, you hear the word painstaking, which means thorough. It's done carefully, completely, no stone unturned. If step 4 is thorough, there's no stone unturned. Um, you know, think when you um think about when you're in your house and you can't find your keys. That's never happened to any of us, right? Or a wallet. It's 7 o'clock in the morning and you got to be at work in 20 minutes or maybe an hour. You go crazy. You don't just go around, oh, my keys are somewhere. No, you thoroughly look for your keys. you know Now, you know we turn over everything, to find them. No center, and then that's exactly what we're doing here, except we're not looking for keys, we're looking for God. And you think about the word path. What creates a path? From a simple layman's perspective, people do. It's formed by many people walking, like a hiking path, walking the same direction over and over again. It's a well-worn way. So it's an established line of travel, and if you follow the path, you wind up in the same destination. Now, if I go, you know what, Howard, we're on this hiking path. Let's go see what goes down the other ravine, and the next thing you know, we're lost. You know, and it's like driving down the road and following directions. We follow the signs that lead to destinations, so I know where I'm going. And so a path is an access to a destination. Another word for path is the way. As I was a kid, I had a Bible, it was called the Way. They called it the hippie Bible. So the path is the way. Our path is a method to find God. And I had been in AA off and on, like I said, for years, and I had no idea what the path was. You hear it read at meetings, and it's what I eventually found out is steps 4 through 9. We can say 4 through 12 or 3 through 12. And once I took the path, and I still follow it. So rarely do people see people fall 4 through 9. And the R in our sentence is the first, well, how many there was when this book is written. They say 100, but Howard, you want to read the original manuscript for that sentence? Rarely.
Yep, the original sentence said, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our directions. The word directions was removed, and you're going to see through a lot of these things that were changed that Bill was intending to give directions, not suggestions. But this one did say directions, and he let them make the change to path.
You want to comment on the rest of the stuff?
Well, it's funny. The expression, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed a path. In today's AA culture, you could actually say, rarely have we seen a person who has thoroughly followed our path. But be that as it may, it says those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Completely, right? Completely means to be thoroughly committed to something. And I'll give you kind of an example, the difference between being thoroughly committed to something and being involved in something, right? A lot of people just going to meetings, they're involved in the AA program, but they're not committed to the AA program. They're not working the program. And the best analogy I can give you is with my favorite meal. bacon and eggs. In the case of bacon and eggs, the pig that gave the bacon was thoroughly committed. The chicken was involved.
Hmm.
See the difference? The chicken gave the egg. He was involved. She was involved. But the pig gave it all. Just a point.
And people often ask me, okay, I've been doing this for a long time, and I didn't believe this at first when I first got here, when I heard a couple people say it. But they asked me this question: how many people who I've seen fail is thoroughly done this? Zero.
Yep.
Because you know, I mean, people will argue with me about that and write noble books. Oh no, I did the steps. Well, did you make your amends? Did you leave stuff out your? There's always something not thoroughly done. You know, and if those I know who follow the directions laid out in this book come to awareness of conscious contact with God in their lives, and then they never look back. And 4 through 9, it removes obstacles within us that stand between us and God. Where do we shove our fears within us? Where do we put our resentments and our guilt? And that's why the steps are not about gaining anything, they're about removing stuff to be closer to God. And rather than worrying about what kind of God, we have, or if God's, better than everyone else's, focus on removing the stuff that stands between you and God, whatever you want it to be. So let's move on here. It says, those who do not recover means restored to health. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely get themselves a simple program. The simple program is 4 through 9. And you hear people, I've heard hundreds of different arguments of what's a cannot and a will not. And, so there are those who cannot or will not, see our way of life. They won't get themselves to this program. They're, closed-minded, negative defensive attitude, but they should, if they've never done this. There's an old saying I remember I used to see when I was a kid. What did it say? Where Satan says, better to rule in hell than serve in heaven. And basically, it's better to rule in my misery than to get honest with somebody, you know. And, there's nothing like, I mean, there's a lot of stubborn alcoholics out there who will not accept this way of life. Are you a cannot or will not? Howard, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I am a firm believer, and Bill uses this term quite a few times in the book. Um, Cannots and will nots. That there are only two types of people who don't recover. The cannots, because they cannot. They are still using, whether it's alcohol or it's marijuana or it's Valium. They're using something, and it may just be drinking lightly, but they're using. And if you're using, you cannot do this. And the will nots, well, as Steve said, those are the don't drink and go to meetings people. They're not willing to do this work. So the cannots can't because they're active. The will nots won't because they're set in their ways. And that in that first line, incidentally, I mentioned the word thoroughly followed our path. Thoroughly. Up until now, we've had some other words that Bill used. He used precisely at the beginning of the book. He used specifically on page 20. He said clear cut directions on page 29. What does that mean? All of those words boil down to this: not subject to interpretation. If something is specific, if something is precise, if something is clear cut, it's not subject to interpretation. And I say that because only in AA will you find people who will read those words precisely, thorough, specifically clear cut, and still make a statement like, but there are as many ways to work this program as there are people in the program. How can you get that? The word means not subject to interpretation. So that's all I wanted to talk about on that.
All right. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being, that means unable, of being honest with themselves. I'm talking about self-honesty. And one of my mentors uses the best definition of honesty he taught me, talking about self-honesty, is awareness of where I'm at. Do I have fear? Do I have resentment? You know, and where am I at in my life? Now look what it says about those who cannot. be honest with themselves. They're such unfortunates. They're not at fault. They've seen them born that way. So this is a kind of a catch-22. Are they born that way? No. And it does not say they are born that way. It says they appear to have been born that way. Because they're not born that way. Because people, come out when they change the result of these steps. They can come out of the, where they think, people say, I got to, hear in meetings all the time, people say, I got to fight today, but it's just who I am. I was born that way. I was born an angry person. I'll always be a jerk. Cannot comprehend change. And one of the biggest defects in the rooms is when people shake their heads when a person's up there telling, their real, a real recovery story. And about the 180-degree turn they did as a result of these steps, about how they're a different person today. And people sit there and, oh, you can't do that. That's the steps don't do that, and guys who got years who probably stay sober on resentment, but what's that means is people question the miracle. And what do they say? Don't leave until the miracle happens. Don't question the miracle. Trust the miracle. Don't wait until the miracle happens. Seek the miracle. Experience the miracle. Know the miracle. Howard, you want to
Yeah, just want to point out that first of all, that people who are constitutionally capable of being honest with themselves. There are those unfortunates. When I first heard that, I thought, well, that's me. I can't do this. And one of my first mentors said, if you can understand that sentence, it doesn't apply to you. But there's an important point to be taken, a conclusion to be taken from that, where he says that there are such unfortunates, they seem to be at fault, they seem to have been born that way. And you're going to hear in a moment what their chances of recovery are. And I'll turn it back to Steve so he can tell you that.
says they are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. I'm going to go right back to Howard because I know in the original manuscript it has a little different wording in there.
Yeah, in the original manuscript, it said they're naturally incapable of grasping and developing a way of life. That's a little bit more hardcore than a matter of living. Matter of living is a little bit more politically correct, a little soft sell, but a way of life is right in your face, I think.
If I hold the cell phone with two fingers, it's wobbly, it's going to probably fall in my hands. And you can take it out of my hand. No one can take it away. If I hold it firmly, I'm grasping it. It's all firmly, grasp also means to develop an understanding of something and fully comprehend the nature and the meaning of something. If I grasp a manner of living that demands rigorous honesty, I'm holding it firmly because I understand and fully comprehend the nature of honesty. So you must grasp honesty before you can develop honesty. Notice that also it does not say develop a manner of living which demands honesty. It says develop a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. What does rigorous mean? Complete. Complete honesty is going deeper, than do I have fear or do I have resentment? It's do I have pride? Do I have self-esteem issues? Do I have emotional, that's why the whole third column is there. If I'm not aware of that third column, those instincts, as they call misdirected instinct, it leads me to a self-seeking behaviors and dishonesty. Complete honesty is living day to day in honesty. And people say, "Oh, that's impossible. You can't have complete honesty." You can, but you kind of have it by just thinking about it, about your resentments and fears, solving it in your head, you know. And I tried, to do that, and my typewriter broke a long time ago, So it's like, but you might see some, you won't see all of it. The average person out there will never have that tool that we've been offered, this personal inventory. I always will see, what it's like to be completely honest. Gaining an awareness of what controls my thinking, why I'm aware of, remember what I'm aware of, I can control, I can work on, but what I'm not aware of will control me. If I'm not aware what causes my resentments by being completely honest with myself through inventory, my defects do not, you know, my defense will continue, to do what they do, you know. And notice it does not say request rigorous honesty. It says demands. There's a difference between a demand and a request. A request is soft spoken, polite. Like, may I please have that pen? A demand is more like, give me the damn pen. It's spoken with harsh intimidation. The difference between demand and request is there's always a threat behind it. When you think of the old West when they robbed the stagecoach, and the robber didn't say, "Can I please have the strong box?" No, they were loud. They might break your fingers with their gun. They demand rigorous honesty. Give me the damn strong box and the guns to your head. What's the threat? Well, you can figure it out, right? The big question is what is a threat if we do not completely be honest, right? Howard, you want to comment on
Yeah, incidentally, on that note, it doesn't say request. It also doesn't say ask, and it doesn't say suggests rigorous honesty. It demands rigorous honesty. And please, the success rate of those people is less than average. That doesn't mean zero. It means less than average. So their chances are possibly good. Think, Kip, bear that in mind. We're going to come back to that in a minute or two.
so,
Steve?
so exactly what it says, their chances are less than average, not average, less than average. That's teetering, a step back, your chances of any substantial recovery are slim. You might, make some meetings and you might get some chips and you bounce in and out of the rooms, you might get some time, but it'll catch up to you. And, I mean, it's hard to do that, it's a hard one to do, and because honesty is based on, I mean, dishonesty, I'm sorry, is based on self-sufficiency, which is relying on self. And honesty is based on God reliance. It's impossible to be dishonest and be God reliant at the exact same time. I don't care how cool you are, it's impossible. I can't be this loving, godly person and lie to your face. You know, how many service commitments a person has, or at your meetings or church or wherever it is. You know, it's tough to walk that path. And when you when you look around, come to presumption that I heard someone say it's come to presumption that you are a dishonest person, because nearly every dishonest person I've ever met comes from a presumption that they're honest. And when a person used to ask you if you're honest, what did you say? I'm always honest. Right. But if a person asks you if you were dishonest, what would you say? Nope, I'm never dishonest. That's the pride issue coming in. So a big part of being dishonest is pride. And plain and simple, if you're not honest, you cannot have the personality change sufficient to bring about recovery. That's what it's, you might get some cool stuff happen, but Howard?
No, that's okay. You use
Okay.
on the same sentence, so go right ahead.
There are those too who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recovery at the capacity to make enough meetings. No, to be honest. Honesty, what do they say? Honesty is the best medicine. And I just mentioned about the miracles that happen. I mean, for myself, I was, diagnosed at a young age with ADD. I might still have a little bit of that running around, but I was also diagnosed with manic depressant and other things too. You know, and that people will say, "Oh, it's just the way he is," and he will always be that way. And take these meds, take this. And I mean, I tried suicide numerous times when I was dry, and going to meetings. I would go crazy in my head, sitting there going, recovery's got to be better than this. And I would go back out. I'm either going to kill myself or I'm going to drink. And drinking saved my life a lot. I will say that, but it destroyed my life at the same time. I did the steps, and I've been doing them, like I said, for 25 years. Now, I might still have a little bit of ADD here and there, but I don't have the manic depressive part anymore. And I have not had a thought of suicide in 25 years. That's the miracle of it. That's the stuff people shake their heads about when I mention it in meetings, because they're sitting there with that stuff in their head. You know, uh-oh, someone's unmuted. Howard, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I love to connect the dots in this book, and it says the manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. If you keep your hand on this page, turn over to page 145 for a moment. 145, in the very first paragraph, it says, in this connection, if you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines, it says, in fact, he may say almost anything if he has accepted our solution, and here it is, which, as you know, demands rigorous honesty. Twice, he says the same exact thing, which is unusual for Bill. He usually chooses different ways of saying it, and he does, but that he says the same way twice. And there's another little subtle point here, which is really being pedantic. But we're talking about the ability to be honest. And in that first paragraph, that word honest, 3 times it appears, 3 times. So I think he's trying to make a point here. But again, the point I want to make, and I've referred to it before, is the chances are less than average. The chances aren't zip. If you don't have the capacity to be honest, somehow, some way, there is a way to recover. May not be the ideal way, but there's another thing that'll come up later where chances are even less than that. So let's continue.
You know, when I first started sponsoring, there was I've got a lot of watering holes, and sometimes you want to take a couple people at the same time, take them through the first 3 steps. And I didn't understand at first when I first started in this journey about, you know, mental emotional disorders. And I'll be there with a guy. One guy says all the quotes, and he's the guy that stands out in rehab. He's great, and the other guy's a little, out there mentally. Guess who's the one that did the steps? The
Yeah.
one that's a little bit out there. Guess who's still sober today? The guy that was a little, and he's not that person anymore. Matter of fact, one guy I sponsored was way gone, and everyone had written him off, and he's a lawyer now, in a good way. you know. So let's see what it says here. Our stories is closed in a general way. What we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. So here's the problem I have with the way this is. Here's the way people say this before they share a meeting. I'm going to talk about what it was like, what happened, and what it is like now. Well, okay, first of all, it is alcohol. And what it's like now, I mean, it's a great formula for following when you follow the sheriff the right way. And they say it wrong, you know, and that's not what it says there. It says, what I used to be like, what happened, and what I am like now. There's no it in there. There's no alcohol in there. So people, get on a 20-minute share, 19 minutes of drinking, you say war stories, war stories, war story, and then, oh yeah, you might want to, do the steps and what's that book called? You know, if they're not talking about, what they are like or were like, they've never done this process. You know, why wouldn't you want to share what what used to be like for I mean, what you used to be like, and how are you gonna know? You're not gonna never understand what you used to be like until you do the steps, and that's what the steps. I think that I know what I was like. I had this allergy obsession. I was ruled by resentments and fear because I was driven by Mr. The bedevilments in 52. That's what I was like. But if you go, what happened? Stay on this page and just go to 25 real quick. It's the simplest way to explain what happened. The middle of 25. Second sentence, that we had deep and effective spiritual experiences that revolutionized our whole attitude towards life and towards the films of God's universe. That's what I did the steps. Boom. not the same person. It took me a long time to figure out I wasn't the same person. And then what's it like now? Move down that page a little bit. The central fact of our lives today is an absolute certainty that our Creator's entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He's commenced to call us to things for us which you can never do for ourselves. And I've heard urban legends in early AA, and you couldn't speak until you did your fifth step. They have mostly speaker meetings back then, but also I know a few meetings around here that hardcore meetings over in Berkeley where you can't speak at all at the meeting until you've done your fifth step. And the guy even says in the preamble, because you got nothing to say. They say, people don't want to hear a drunk-along and know how they drank. They don't want to hear about driving off and people would rather hear all that stuff. They want to hear about a guy going off the cliff. I mean, I spoke in a meeting one night, rather large speaker meeting, and it was 2 half-hour speakers. So I was the first one, and the other guy was the second one. I mean, I'm sorry, I was the second one. And the first guy got up there, and he's a big, tall guy and loud talker, and he told some cool war stories. He's funny, goofy, loud, and I got up there and talked with passion and the way I talk. And I can talk about this since I get teary-eyed when I talk about what happened. And some people shook their heads. One guy came up to me and goes, "Your story is boring." I think he would rather hear about the guy, no, because your story's boring. I'd rather hear about John, but what the guy's name? I don't remember his name. Him rolling down the hill when he OD'd, you know. And I mean, before I had this awakening, I look back and I would come around certain times as I wasn't just a fake it till you make it guy. I was a faker to make you think I made it. And I would be asked to share meetings. And I didn't talk about anything. I was stuck in what it was like, the victim. When I did the steps, I had a real story to tell. What I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. That's a hell of a story. You could also add in there what it says later, is how we establish a relationship with God. Howard?
Yeah. Um, I'm glad you pointed that out because it doesn't say it used to be like. This is these two lines people always point to for how to tell your story. Well, it says our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like. What did we used to be like? We were running on self-will, right? What happened? We had some kind of spiritual revelation. What we're like now, running on God's will. And as Steve mentioned towards the end there, if you hold your hand on this page and turn back to page 29 for a second, on page 29 too is a much better direction for how to tell your story. When you're asked to get up in front of a room and tell your story, please don't turn to page 58, turn to page 29. And it's going to tell you that in your personal story, you're supposed to describe in your own language and from your own point of view the way you established your relationship with God to give a clear cut idea of what has actually happened in your lives. And how did I establish my relationship with God? Step one, step two, step three, step four. To go through your journey with the steps. Not like those guys who have a 30-minute time limit, spend 25 minutes on a war story, and in the 29th minute say, "Oh, and then I got into sobriety and I got a sponsor and I worked the steps and life is great. Thank you for having me." That's not what we're supposed to do. And here's another example while we're on it. Page 50, paragraph 2 tells us in our personal stories, you'll find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. That's what we're supposed to do, to tell you in our own language and from our own point of view how we work the steps, how we approached and established our relationship with our Creator. That's what we're supposed to tell.
Right.
Go ahead.
All right. So, the other thing is, it's like I'll share for a meeting for an hour or do the, you know, I don't like 20-minute shares, not enough time, but if I do a 20-minute share, I go right into just you know, I just say, you know, I three things about my past mentally and everything else and say, here I did the steps and blah, 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 blah. And here's what happened. And I don't speak about how they should do the steps. I speak of how I did the steps. And so let's go back to where we're at. If you decide you want what we have, you know, like, and again, before I do the steps, you know, they would ask that question. And I look around the room and go, what, you know, he's got a nice car and he's got a nice looking lady with him. You know, I would always look for something people had. So I kind of like that line. You know, the we is the first 100, right? If you decide you want what we have, so you decide what you want the first 100 to have, and are willing, and here's the condition. There's a condition behind you know, you wanting what they had, and are willing to go to any lengths to get it. You're ready to take certain steps. You know, you want to read the original manuscript on that?
Absolutely. The original manuscript said, if you've decided you want what we have, and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to follow directions. Clearly, he's giving directions. He's not making suggestions. Then you're ready to take certain steps, was originally follow directions. And incidentally, I don't know if you finished, Steve, but these last two lines that Steve just read, whenever anybody asks, when do I start working the steps? Doesn't say that anywhere in the book. Yeah, it does. We just read it. When do you start working the steps? When you decide that you want what we have, you decided you want that permanent recovery, and you're willing to go to any length to get it, permanent recovery, then you're ready. How hard is that to figure out? When do we start working the steps? When you say, I want what you've got, let's get busy. That's when you start working the steps. Doesn't say after 90 meetings, 90 days. Doesn't say after 6 months, after 7 months, after 9 months, after a year. When you decide you've got what we want, that someone's got what you want, get busy. Go right ahead.
You know, going to any lengths is a condition I believe we must have in a mindset prior to doing the steps, because if you're not willing to go to any lengths, you're saying, you know, I'm not going to be completely honest here. I mean, or thorough. You're not going to go to any lengths. You're not going to go. You're not going to, you know, do that in 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, and you're not going to go, you know, make any amends at all. You know, going to any lengths is being completely honest in 4 and 5. No stone unturned, letting everything out, letting, you know, letting God remove our defects in 6 and 7. And it's going back to those old places that you maybe stole from, or people we hurt, the ex girl, and making amends with no, you get fear, but you walk through the fear. That's going to any lengths. And so I ask people, are you ready to go to any lengths? And if, you know, I always say, if you're not willing to go any lengths, this obsession will, or it's probably still there, but it welcome you back with open arms, you know. And look at, so we're going to the next paragraph. It says, some of these we balked, and you know, balk means to refuse to comply. But the origins of the word balk is kind of interesting. Is when a donkey would be refusing to move forward, because donkeys were used for traveling. They could carry a lot of heavy weight, so bags and stuff. And sometimes the donkeys would stop, so they called that balking. You know what it means is stubborn donkey. It's a stubborn donkey. And why did we balk? We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. You know, there's one person in here at some point did not try, you know, who did not try an easier, softer way. And I know it because, you know, you're here. The 12 steps is doing the steps is like our final stop after trying everything else. Howard, you want to, there's a original manuscript that says something different too, right?
Right, yes. The original manuscript gets very personal. A lot of this. It says, at some of this, you may balk. Change to we balk. We thought we could find an easier, softer way was originally, you may think you can find an easier, softer way. And then with all, I'm sorry, but we could not. But what could not was originally, we doubt if you can. So let me read those two lines. At some of these, you may balk. You may think you can find an easier, softer way. We doubt if you can. Lots of that. Lots of pointing the fingers. And an easier, softer way. I mean, what are examples of easier, softer ways? Don't drink, go to meetings, right? Don't get a sponsor. I know I'm going to befriend a lot of people here, but get 2 or 3 sponsors. That is definitely an easier, softer way, but that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. How about holding back on some of the steps? Just easier, softer ways. I'm sure you could think of a lot more also. Steve?
I mean, an easier, softer way is anything you try that did not give you a spiritual awakening, did not remove the obsession. And it's again, whatever you softer ways have you tried. I mean, I've mentioned some, Howard mentioned some in the past. There's a lot of ways we tried, just going to meetings. See what it says next. It says, with all earnestness at our command. So they're saying, please listen. We beg you to be fearless. That means fact-facing and thorough from the very start. The very start of walking, the path. And we be fearless from the beginning. Fearless does not mean you have no fear, but it's the ability to face fear. We call courage. You want to comment on that sentence, Howard?
No, you can go on with that.
Some of these we tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Alcoholics and addicts are the most hard-headed people in the world. We will defend ideas despite evidence to the contrary that go against it. We will defend our lies. We will be the back of a cop car defending those ideas. What's an old idea? So like the alcoholic gets into a car accident and takes out 2 houses. I gotta quit driving. But what's an old idea? Old idea is resentment. That's an old idea. I'm holding on something from the past, or guilt. I'm holding on something from the past. We're going to hold on to that stuff to the gates of insanity and death. So what they're saying, the result of holding on to old ideas, result was nothing until we let go. Right? The condition, we cannot let go on our own power. If we could, why would we need this meeting on a Friday night or Thursday night? Sorry. We need to let go to help us, we need God to help us let go. That's why it says, let God remove these defects of characters. So step 4, we need step 4 to write all this stuff out. I mean, if step 3 was step 6, we would admit like 2 things. But so we got inventory to write down all the stuff we need to put down. We have 5 to discover why we held on to this stuff. And then 6 and 7 so we can let go absolutely. God either is everything or else he's nothing. Meaning I'm either going to trust God, can take me better things, or I'm not. Howard, you want to comment on that?
Yeah. Earlier in the previous paragraphs, we were told that if you are incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty, that your chances are less than average. Also, if you have grave emotional and mental disorders, chances are less than average. Neither one is 0. Here's where the chances are 0. It says, some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas. Let's go back to the previous paragraph. It said our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, running on self-will. That's our old ideas. And hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil. zero, until let go absolutely. In other words, accepted God's will. So using the interpretation from the previous paragraph that we're supposed to tell what we are like, what we were like, running on self-will, what happened, spiritual intervention, what we are like now, running on God's will. If I apply that to this, some of us have tried to hold on to self-will, and the result was nil, zero, zip, ugats, nothing, until we accepted God's will. That's it.
It's next paragraph says, remember, we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. You know, here's the thing is, you hear people say, oh, it's alcohol is always doing push-ups outside my door. It'll always be there. You just don't know what it is, all this crap. So it's like there's nothing baffling about alcohol in its liquid form. It's, you know, like I said, it's not doing push-ups, you know, outside my door. It's cunning and baffling and powerful because I'm gonna drink it and use despite knowing all the consequences involved. That's so they're talking about the obsession. That's why it's cunning, baffling, and powerful. I'm gonna drink besides knowing everything that's gonna happen, and I'm gonna forget everything that happens. And think about this for a second. When you were a kid and you played tag, you're it. Well, you're it until you do something about it. The obsession is your life until you do something about it, until you take action. So you can have a life of peace and God and have some hiccups along the way where you trip and scratch your knee, or you can have a life of the obsession and continue rolling downhill and living that life, you know, or take action. You know, remember, you don't choose to drink, it chooses you. Howard?
Yeah. Remember that, well, first of all, let me go over the way it was originally written. In the original manuscript, it didn't say, remember that we deal with alcohol. In the original manuscript, it says, remember that you are dealing with alcohol. But just also by way of sharing on this, he starts out by saying, remember. Why? Why is it necessary for us to be reminded? Next to that, you may want to write, for why, see page 24, paragraph 1. And if you want to turn to that, hold your place here, turn to page 24, paragraph 1, and you get your answer. Why does he have to remind us? Because the fact is that we've lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We're unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of a week or a month ago without defense against the first drink. That's why he needs to remind us of that. And I just as a I don't know, a side note, if I were to change one word in this book, it's on this page. The sentence we just read says, remember that we deal with alcohol. I'm not dealing with alcohol no more. I'm done with alcohol. I would change that word to alcoholism. Remember, we deal with alcoholism. Why do I say that? Because alcohol comes in a bottle. I'm not dealing with something in a bottle anymore. I'm dealing with something that's in me. Alcoholism is in people. Alcohol is in a bottle. So what we're dealing with is in us. I'm not dealing with alcohol anymore. Just a minor point. I think I wish they would have changed that word, not rarely or never. That's the word that should be changed. Um, and then just by definition, we're dealing with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Cunning, something that's cunning is clever, it's crafty, it's shrewd, it's sharp, it's resourceful. Go ahead, Steve.
All right, let's move on. It says, without help is too much for us. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Now, the manuscript says something different, right?
Yeah, it says, without help, it is too much for you. Again, a lot of this, a lot of yous. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. You must find him now.
Hmm.
You must was changed to may you. Sorry.
The thing about it is, we need God, not yesterday, not tomorrow, right now, when we're doing this, because we're trying to connect to God so we can connect in the present. That's why it's a gift. And think about, we have, pain from fear, resentments, and guilt, and we think it's holding on to us. The truth is we're holding on to the pain and resentment and the fear and the guilt, and we push it where far inside of ourselves. And then the thought hits us, should I talk about this with someone? Should I be honest? Do I need to let it go? Maybe I should make these amends? Where do those thoughts come from when we start questioning? I know they came from God before I even had God. Because I came around here the last time, I knew I was physically done, but I was physically done a couple of times. But this time I was like, I need to do this. And I look back and I was hearing it. Because where is God? Within us. God's been talking to us for a long time. But the volume was a little low and hazy and cutting out because of resentments that we take this beautiful temple that's inside of us and we store it with garbage. I used to have a friend who used to say, we have the most beautiful temple inside of us, and we keep a backed up toilet in it, you know, and it's time to clean it. You know, it's like when you shake up a soda bottle, right? What happens? It explodes and everything comes out. And the condition is you must be willing to pop the lid here. And when the bottle's empty, what's left in that empty bottle? God. And we all have do is filled in empty. All we ever done is filled in emptiness with alcohol, right? And I think it was Carl Jung that said alcoholics is really a search for wholeness, and they filled that wholeness with alcohol until they find that wholeness. You know, all we've done is to attempt to be whole. Only God can make us whole. And if I'm not willing, to become whole and do 439, I'm going to continue to fill myself with alcohol and attempt to feel whole. Look what it says next. Half measures avails nothing. Kind of the same thing as, if my phone number, if I give you guys my phone number and it's, you dial six numbers, it's going to avail you nothing. It's not going to get anywhere. You have to do all the numbers, right? Any lengths. Look what it says next. We stood at the turning point. Go back to 53 real quick. What's the turning point? It says, when we became alcoholics crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fiercely face the proposition that either God is everything or he's nothing. God there is or isn't. What's our choice to be? That's the turning point. What's your choice? If you're reluctant to do that, what are you holding on to? There's no middle of the road on this one. There's no maybe God in the middle. I'll find it when I get there. You may never, be at this. Here's the most important thing I tell sponsees. You may never have this chance again. When you're on your knees and you're ready to go on your knees, do it because you may never have this chance again. So turning point is when you stop finally, and you stop and go a different direction. It's a new one. Like the story I told last week about, I use the analogy of falling in a hole over and over and over again until I finally went a different direction. Back to 59. We ask his care, we ask his protection and care with complete abandon. Doesn't the manuscript say something different there, Howard? Or is it the same thing?
Oh boy, does it ever.
So I thought.
Yeah, the manuscript says half measures will avail you nothing. That is a little bit more heavy-handed than half measures availed us nothing. Half measures will avail you nothing. You stand at the turning point, not we stood. Then it says, instead of we asked his protection and care, it says, throw yourself under his protection and care.
Wow.
with complete abandon. So he wants you to fully commit to it. Don't be the chicken, be the pork, be the pig, completely committed to it. And here's one of my favorite parts. He says, throw yourself under his protection and care with complete abandon. And then there was a sentence that was completely removed, and that sentence is, now we think you can take it. I wish they would have kept that in there. But incidentally, I wanted to mention something in the previous
Wasn't there
paragraph. Huh?
wasn't there one that says we doubt it if you can, or is that somewhere else?
It's somewhere else.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So, I remember struggling with the word abandon because I related the word abandon with like my parents leaving me behind or my friends leaving me behind. This is a different type of abandon, you know. You're leaving yourself behind, and when you turn to a new direction, it means you're you know, under his care with complete abandon, the care of God, the care of God. And we'll talk about that when we get to, step three, but it's like, or we can keep walking the same old direction, you know, and and wonder why we stay sick, having, the victim's mindset and saying stuck. And this is what we're going to leave off at. It says, here are the steps we took, which suggest a program of recovery. Doesn't it say something different in there in the manuscript?
um, let's see. In the original manuscript, it says, here are the steps we took, which are suggested as your program of recovery, not suggested as a program. This one's for you, baby.
So I have a question for you, Howard, and I've always wondered this. I've heard it before, but I want to hear it from you. Is who made the suggestion to change it from you to we?
Well, when the book was put together in the mimeograph copies that was sent out to various members of the clergy and professionals, doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, one of the people it went to is Dr. Howard in Montclair, New Jersey. And Dr. Howard suggested to Bill to change all of the yous to a collective we, that you can't just be giving people orders. You need to soften it up. And that means going through the whole book and doing that. And that was Bill's comment. I mean, you really want me to go through the whole book again and do that? And he said, yes. So for a backup, Bill asked Dr. Silkworth what he thought of that suggestion. And Silky said, absolutely. So Bill went back and he changed it all from you to we.
Hmm. Well, we'll stop there. Anything else you want to say before we close, Howard? We're right.
No, we could talk about it next week.
We will. We'll do a little recap of this next week, and we'll get into. We'll continue. Let me stop the recording.